meant to hit pause and I accidentally hit stop, and I'm not sure how to stitch videos together. So this one's going to be a two-parter, unless I hit stop again. Okay, so I don't remember exactly where I was when I left off, but basically this is kind of the evolution we have going on here. And so what I'm going to do now is kind of zoom out and show this dynamic, how it unfolds over time. Right, so we've got original view, confused view, right? Less confusing view, no view. We learn here and evolve. So now this view becomes our new view here, right? And we then move over to a less confused view up to no view. Again, from no view, we examine our improved view, see what's going on, aha. And so essentially what we're seeing is a stepwise evolution. From confused view to less confused view to no view. No view then incorporates the less confused view, right? Perhaps even tweaks it or improves it. And then we're always moving out to a new pole to find our next improvement, our next tweak. And a couple things about this. So obviously this looks kind of neat and stepwise, and I do think that this does track maybe in a general level how things evolve. I think on an experiential level, it's not always this clean. I think from day to day, right? It's not like we go to bed here and then wake up in the morning here and pick up where we left off. We may kind of maybe we have a contemplative day, we get up here, but then the next day we're starting off back here. And it doesn't mean we necessarily have to work every step all the way back up. We may go here and go, oh, okay, that's right, and then go here, and then actually jump up here, right? Or we may go down here, right? Oh no, we have what feels like a setback, right? A stressor comes into our life. Our frequency drops, we feel negative, we feel threatened, right? Our heart closes, and that always brings us back down. And we jump back up here. So in other words, yes, this is a very clean stepwise progression, but on an experiential level, we're gonna see a lot more jumping around. And likewise, it doesn't always necessarily have to work in this lockstep motion. You may actually jump to a whole new framework or paradigm, something that's kind of on a different track entirely. And it's not like there's a necessarily set pinnacle up here that you have to do to get to that. You may get here, see this, right, and go, ooh, okay, and get there. And what I think is key is these jumps, right, where we're moving around and making what looks almost like a quantum leap or a paradigm shift, is really enabled by no view. Right? Because it's from that position of no view. Again, it's not denying that we've had views in the past. It's not denying that attitudes are circling around in our brain. It's not some blank slate state. That's not how I experience it, and that's not how I'm seeing it described. Instead, it's really more of a detachment. We're not identifying ourselves with one view or another, not thinking this view is bad, this view is good. Instead, we're appreciating the relative nature of the views. Right, we're recognizing perhaps over time, aha, there's this pattern that's going on, and then we realize the benefit of detaching from them, right, allowing ourselves the freedom to think openly about it. And when we allow ourselves to think openly about it without any sense of loyalty, right, or any sense of loyalty maybe to the positive one, and then we feel like an aversion to the bottom one, we essentially stop being so emotional about it and stop being so personal about it, and really look at it more as, hey, I've kind of gotten to the limit of where I think this is going to serve me, right? I recognize that this one's serving me more than this one, but how do I perhaps serve myself even more than this? I maybe kind of hit a wall here, I've plateaued, I'm not really getting any benefits anymore. And that's where that move to no view can be more helpful. Let me map this with a different conceptuality here, right? And so I'll use some initials. So no view, confused / confusing view, and then less confusing view. Oh, I used an F there. Okay. So another way to think of this is the terminology I've used in another video, is you can call this cognition, call this recognition, right, or recognition, and then I call this one decognition. So as I'm using these terms, cognition is essentially rethinking what you already think you think, right? So you've already got a framework for looking at things, you've already got an outlook on it, perhaps going back to our original example. when you look at this and then you see this person, right, playing their podcast that you don't like, or holding a banner for something you don't like. Cognition is, if your way is externalizing right now, then that's your cognition. Why? That's the habit of mind, the loop of mind that you're kind of in. Recognition, right, that's the example where, hey, we internalize, right, and perhaps we began by internalizing blame. Why? Because we're making one move. Before we were blaming outwards, now we're blaming in. This is a recognition. Why? Because perhaps we've recognized, hey, this game doesn't work. This externalizing game, I'm recognizing it as essentially, I've gotten my limit out of it. Whatever it was doing for me at some point, it's not doing anything for me anymore. In fact, perhaps it's actually hurting me at this point. So I recognize that, and it's that recognition that the current game isn't working that enables us to experiment with the new game. Right? Aha, okay, so I've directed my blame outward. Let's see what happens when I direct my blame in. And then decognition is when we say, okay, I've got my cognition, right, that I had before. I've got my recognition. Hey, I recognize that's better. In decognition, I essentially say, I'm going to leave you guys where you are. I'm not going to identify myself with you. I'm not going to think I need you, right? I'm not going to get associated with cravings with you, right? I'm not going to associate any pride or shame with you. As much as possible, I'm going to D, right? Get out of that state of no view, right? Kind of like the koan, the gong. These are what they are. And essentially in this state, you free yourself to see a better way. And again, the better way, like I was showing before, could be a tweak on this, right? So essentially you could say, okay, in my decognition, perhaps I get a higher level of recognition on my recognition, right? So here I saw blame directed outward, didn't work. Here I saw blame directed inward. Maybe up here in my D, I'm freed a new re. I recognize that this inward blame isn't working, so I change the blame for curiosity. Or maybe in my decognition, I spend a lot of time in decognition. I'm really maybe in a deep meditative or contemplative state. I'm deliberately not acting. I'm deliberately not directing my attention toward my environment. I'm really letting my mind sit and be still and be quiet and be receptive to new ways of doing things, right? And it may not be something that arises to me like a light bulb going off. It may not be an epiphany. It may be something that gets planted like a seed while I'm in that state of decognition, right? Maybe I'm sitting on my meditation pillow. I'm like, ooh, baby. And my ego is always wanting that epiphany to come in, like a lightning bolt, like, oh, there it is, right? Because then we feel proud, we feel good. I did it. What I'm finding, though, is that the deeper gains, the deeper improvements are really something that arises from within, down here in the intuition, right down in the gut. A seed gets planted, we may not even notice it, but it was our going into this state of decognition and not looping around in these that freed our mind up, right? Freed our intuition up to relax, right? And to explore new possibilities. And then this seed may germinate over seconds, hours, weeks, months, even years, until it finally comes into fruition in the mind. Maybe that lightning bolt strikes, right? Maybe that plant or tree grows out of that seed way down the line. Maybe we don't even realize it was that meditative session we had a week ago, an hour ago, 3 decades ago, where that seed got planted. But because we went into that deep state of no view, that deep state of decognition, we allowed new possibilities to arise far beyond the horizons that these loopy states allow for us. And so now perhaps in that decognized state, instead of making the next step of improvement, which was just change blame for curiosity, maybe I actually level up right to that next one, which was compassion. Right? And so I go straight to that. Boom. And I'm moving on. Right? Charting that back on our little map over here. It's kind of like, I don't know, maybe like skipping a grade or something like that, right? We're here, we go into no view, right? The natural progression in this would be to go right here, right? This is where that curiosity was. But perhaps because we've deeply decognized, we get that little seed planted and boom, we bounce up to compassion, right? Now, of course, we still may get some experience with curiosity, right? So we know what that's like, but especially if we've already had a taste with what it's like with compassion, the curiosity very quickly is going to be recognized for us as relatively weak, as relatively ineffective, and so we're likely to remain up here and then continue our progress up. So this is why, I mean, it seems like all my videos, eventually I'm just like, hey, open the heart, let go, meditate. This is really another model for why I think that's so effective, because meditation is essentially a practice in decognition and recognition, right? And in fact, I think this is actually a map of how meditation goes in terms of its depth. When we sit down on the cushion, what my experience is, whatever thoughts were rattling around in my mind before I sat down, they're still there. And eventually, especially if I'm doing a meditation where I'm consciously trying to recognize my thinking, then I start to recognize, right? I start to go, okay, what patterns am I seeing in my mind, right? And I try not to get caught up in pattern recognition. I try to essentially let the mind up here relax and let the intuition begin to do its deeper pattern recognition. So we have a stillness and a quietness we're cultivating up here, perhaps by following the breath, perhaps by attending to the body, perhaps by counting the breath, perhaps by doing a mantra. These are essentially to keep this mind from looping in its old patterns, right? We're essentially giving it something else to chew on for a while. And we're freeing this deeper mind of the gut and of the heart, right? Which is where I think our best and deepest ideas come from. We're freeing this up from the constant chatter and storminess of up here, right? And of managing life, managing the environment, worrying about my next meal, worrying about the conversation I just had or I'm about to have, right? All the things we tend to get caught up in. We sit on the cushion, we shut the environment out, we give the monkey mind up here something to do other than spin in its loops, and then we free the intuition up to receive new seeds, right? New ideas, new opportunities. And we try not to get too hung up on chasing epiphanies, going down there with curiosity and being like, ooh, what did I just think of? We really try to let that happen. And that's really the discipline, I think, of the meditation, is to recognize, hey, let the monkey mind chew its banana and let the deep intuitive mind relax, soften, and receive. Okay, so the last thing I think I want to do here is to talk about shortcuts. Okay, so we've got no view. We've got confused, confusing view, and then we've got relatively less confused or confusing view. And what we may think, right, is, okay, I've got my confused view. Why don't I just skip this and just do this? Right? I got my confused view, right? And I'm just going to go right into no view. And I think as a reality that this does happen, but I think what we don't appreciate is it actually always has to involve this step. Because in order to realize we are in a confused view, we have to recognize. Right? We have to essentially, from some degree of remove, see that we're operating a confused view, perhaps one we recognize, right? Oh, I've been in this loop before. I'm actually right around here in the loop. I recognize that, boom, and I then go up to decognition. And my thoughts on this are honestly kind of mixed and unsure. What I like about this, obviously, is the efficiency of it. There's also something in here that feels akin to surrender, right? And it's hard to argue against that. Just one little note on this, surrender, again, when I first experimented with it, and honestly sometimes when I still do, I tend to kind of dramatize it, right? I surrender everything out, right? And I'll name who I'm surrendering it to and do all those things. And there's nothing wrong with that. But in my kind of cognition, decognition, recognition around surrender, what I found is it's really more about an unclenching or a letting go, right? So going back to our little meditation cushion, it's about not having this thing insist that it have all the good ideas, right? That it realize what's going on, that it be always available to look down in the intuition and say, ooh, what's going on now? Ooh, what's going on there? It was kind of, for me, the idea of like kind of a child being in a room, like a laboratory with scientists, and it's going around and it's kind of smashing the beakers and tipping things over and erasing stuff off the whiteboard, because in its curiosity, it's trying to figure out what's going on, but it's really not well suited to deal with the complexity of what's going on down here, This is where dreams and myth and all the other profoundly, not just complex, but deeply interconnected modes of intelligence operate. And this is where we like decide what we want to order for food, right? Or kind of decide, hey, do I want to wear red pants today or blue pants today, right? This is very well suited to making decisions in kind of a task flow, right? You wouldn't want to outsource that necessarily here. This is about recognizing the deep, deep patterns of life, of beingness, of existence, and then essentially those bubble up and then allow the cognizing mind, the monkey mind, right, the labyrinth mind, to then have an improved set of tasks to operate with, an improved choice menu. But it always comes from the bottom up. But this thing, because it's caught up in pride and shame, because it's vain and because it's kind of recklessly curious, is always going to want to dive back in. And so that's why surrender is just about not doing that, right? And if we can, not looping too, right? Essentially in real time, right, surrendering outside of meditation is basically briefly re-engaging in meditative mode, right? Okay, I'm caught in looping, I'm going down. Instead, I'm gonna take a conscious breath. I'm gonna feel my feet. I'm gonna actively and consciously engage my senses. I'm gonna look at my environment, look at that tree, notice the sounds around me. Right? I'm gonna get out of mental activity and mental absorption, right, and back into something that's more grounded, right? Something that's calmer, something that's more flow. That's the form of surrender that I've found more effective and more helpful. Because if you do the more dramatic surrender, sometimes it's like you're tempted to maybe close your eyes, you're tempted to like throw things, you think it's like throwing things away. I surrender, almost like a form of abandonment. And we may abandon people, we may abandon things, we may abandon our conscious awareness of our environment in that moment, which if you're driving or if you're operating your body really in any way is unhealthy and unsafe. So again, I kind of like this little, what feels like a shortcut, but I think we just want to recognize that recognition is always a step that's involved there. And I think we also want to recognize that there is a wisdom to some degree to surrendering into this process. Because if we start doing this, it's really easy to make it an ego game. And ego is always involved in it, but it's almost like the ego can start to be in the driver's seat and say, okay, hey, other people, that's good for others, this stepwise progression. But I want to start making quantum leaps immediately. I want to start leveling up right away. I want the cheat code, right? I want to essentially put my thumb on the scale in my own favor and move along, evolve at a faster pace. And we know that hurrying, right, is a sign of scarcity, right, which is a sign of confusion, is a sign of misunderstanding. So if scarcity and hurrying and confusion are informing our outlook here, is essentially baking a poison pill into our process. We're kind of setting ourselves up, not to fail, but to essentially have unnecessary inefficiencies in here. In other words, haste makes waste, right? We're here and we're like, screw that. I'm just gonna jump like this. I'm not gonna do this process here. Again, if this is informed by a scarcity mindset, I think what we're gonna find is you're gonna get up here and then you're gonna just jump back here, but you're gonna be confused. You're gonna be like, whoa, no, I'm on level 4. What am I doing back on level 1? No, I don't like this. And we try to jump back here and then we go here. And we jump here and then we go down here, and we may spend a week down here. So in other words, surrender doesn't just mean use surrender as some kind of cheat code or trick to try to cognize quicker, to try to expedite this process. Really surrender to the process. Know that jumping, like I described before, is going to happen inevitably anyway. But if you surrender more into the flow and allow the process to be stepwise, right? Allow recognition to show, hey, I see what you're doing here, and I see a slight improvement. To accept that slight improvement is okay, and that if we're insisting that our improvement be grand, be sudden, be glorious, right? That's an indication we're in this scarcity ego game, right? Kind of this pride, shame loop, right? Instead of being in a dance, these are just coiling around each other, spiraling, taking us with it. And so, yes, I see the benefits of this. Yes, I do this myself all the time. And this maybe is a message both to myself and a message to others who are on the same path that I am, that if you're going to do this, we've got to really be honest about what our motivations are. And instead, the wiser thing may not be to use surrender as a shortcut, but instead surrender into the process cultivate that meditative, contemplative mindset in real time. Trust that intuition and heart are always working behind the scenes, always developing. And the more we can allow our energy to not get stuck in these loops and to then be free to operate here and let the mind focus on what the mind, and I'm talking about when I say mind, I guess really here I'm talking more about kind of the head brain, right? Let it focus on what it's meant to focus on, right? Which is the tasks of our life, and to sensing its environment, right? Processing sound, processing sight, processing taste, putting it all together into experience, right? That's what this thing is meant to do. This is where long-term planning, life arcing, connecting with our higher purpose, that's where this comes from. And this thing wants to be that, but it's not. So if we can surrender into that knowledge and that truth, right, then allow this thing to re-engage into a level that it's meant to be on, it frees a lot of mental energy here, avoids a lot of confusion, and that's where we can then really begin to make progress in our stepwise path from confusing view, less confusing view to no view, cognition, recognition, decognition. So now let me try and take it back to where I started. What is the right view? I think it is a simultaneous, kind of a superposition of two things. The right view is a recognition that no view is the right view. If you had to identify the right view, right, it would be no view. However, we are beings unfolding in time, right? We're not just spirits in an ethereal realm or God in the Godhead that manifests with a snap of the finger, right? We're not there yet. We are operating in time, right? And in time, the right view of a being in time is, I think, what I laid out before. Right? Cognition, recognition, decognition. Confused view, less confused view, no view, right? This, right, and then really this, I think has to be, well, and let me back off of that. From where I stand, I believe that is an element of right view, and that if we fixate only on no view, then we're going to keep making this shortcut, and it's not going to work. Let me just say, I keep trying to make this shortcut, and it keeps not working, right? In part, I think because of that scarcity ego thing I was talking about before. Also because it denies the role time plays. It's treating time as some enemy, something that's holding us back, a ball and chain, quicksand, or a tar pit, instead of recognizing that time is the medium in which this process unfolds. And so if I surrender into time, I surrender into this process, right? I surrender into the three-part nature of my brain and recognize the relative strengths and weaknesses of my three-part brain. That's, I think, the right view, that accepts both the absolute truth that no view is right, and then the relative view, truth in time, which is that getting to no view is something we actually do over and over and over, and it produces a stepwise progress and evolution in our thinking. Let me just look at my notes here, see if there's anything else I wanted to say. Nope, I think that's it.